Welcome along to this webinar from the Computer Information Agency. My name is Robert Crane, and today we'll be looking at SharePoint questions and answers. This is the first presentation in the question and answer series. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to contact me directly via my email address, director@ciaops.com. You can also get more information about my business at the website www.ciaops.com. So with that, let's get started. So the first thing I need to check is to make sure that everybody can hear me. If there are any issues, basically we need to just go up into the feedback area in the top right hand corner and let me know if there are issues, but hopefully everybody who's online can hear me well enough. Would seem to be that's the case. So in that case, we'll kick off. So just a bit of housekeeping to start us along. Firstly, if you want to provide any feedback online during the progress of this webinar, please feel free to do so via Twitter. To do that, so I can see what your response and feedback is, please use the hashtag CIAOps. My Twitter handle is DirectorCIA, so again you can use that as a means to contact me directly. And information about obtaining a resource guide will be made available at the end of this presentation. So the agenda for today, we're here for hopefully around 60 minutes. We're going to look at command line backups in SharePoint. We'll look at some document libraries, document management best practices. We'll talk about some downsides to SharePoint, as well as some of the alternatives that are out there to the SharePoint product. We'll have a quick look at SharePoint 2010. Hopefully, if time permits, we'll have a look at embedding a video into a SharePoint site, and then we'll run over a number of conclusions. So firstly, let's turn our attention to the command line backup option, which is available in SharePoint. You have to run the command line backup from the SharePoint server, basically from the command line or the DOS prompt on the SharePoint server. So this means that you'll obviously need access to that server, and you'll also need access as an administrator to achieve that. Basically, the command line backup uses a utility called STS-ADM, which is found in the binary directory of SharePoint. There are two important commands or options that allow the backup and restore of information from the command line. The first one is the STS-ADM-O backup and STS-ADM-O restore. This is normally the most common backup and restore command that you'll see. However, it does have a number of, drawbacks. It can basically only back up a single site. If you have multiple sites or sites under your top level site, then this STS-ADM-O backup will not normally back up that information. To overcome that, it's probably recommended that you look at implementing the STS-O export and import. So the advantage with the export and import is firstly that it allows you to back up at a top level of your SharePoint site and anything underneath. It also allows you to perform a merge between SharePoint sites. So you can use the STS-ADM-O export and import command as an option to import and migrate your data. So that means that you can bring it across without overriding an existing site. Now, this is different from the -O backup command, because the -O backup command basically will overwrite any site that is in its location when you do the restore. So again, the export and import function allows you to do a merge, while a backup and restore basically does a complete override. Now once you become familiar with the STS-ADM command line utility and parameters, what you can do is you can script that into a batch file. Once you put this into a batch file, this means you can easily run it at any point in time. And generally what you do is you schedule the batch file to run via the Windows scheduler. So that provides you with the ability to run these command line backups at a certain point in time. So let's just go out and have a look at those options. So let me just switch across to our desktop here. So what we're looking at here when we come up is basically an SharePoint version SharePoint version 3 company web running on an SBS server. So what I've done is I've gone out to the command line, and as you can see, I've changed to the binaries directory where the STS command resides. Now that resides in a directory C:\program files, common files, Microsoft shared, web server extensions, /12/bin. So if you type STS-ADM on the command line by itself, what you'll find is that you'll be given the parameters for the STS-ADM command. And you will have to excuse this machine because we are obviously running this in a virtual machine technology, and there will be a bit of a delay running some of the commands. But as you can now see, when I run STS-ADM on the command line by itself, you'll get a full list of all the parameters that are available with this command. Okay, and you'll see in here that we've got STS-ADM -o backup, and these are the further parameters. You need to specify the URL, the server, the site that you want to back up, and a file name as a destination. So you will also see down here a little bit further, you have the restore command as well. Okay, so basically it's the reverse. So again, what we can do here is, if we want to perform a backup, we can just run STS-ADM -o backup -URL, give it the site, http:// the SharePoint site. In this case, it's going to company web. Specify the file name. Again, you can specify the file name to be any location. So I'm going to call it into this directory called that. And I use the final overwrite parameter to overwrite any existing backup that may exist. So again, just push that, enter that command, and a few seconds later, what you'll see is just a return to the command prompt. So hopefully in a second it will come back with... Now what we can do obviously is that we can script this into a batch file. So again, we can see the operation ran successfully. So what I can now do is I can look at scripting this into creating a backup file. So what I've done here is I have created already a batch file. So again, very simple batch file. All it does is stops the screen output, clears the screen, sends a message to my console saying that the backup is going to run, and then it runs the STS-ADM -o backup command, and then it runs the STS-ADM export command, and as you can see, it'll then do a directory of these two data files. So what I can do now is if I go out to the prompt and I run this batch file, you'll see that the difference in parameters between the two different backup types we're running. So again, in this case, the first thing is you can see the normal backup run, and now the export is actually running as well. So you'll see it gives you a whole lot more information. It's far more verbose. You can see it working through each folder, list, sublist as it goes through creating the data file. And again, the information that is recorded on the screen is also recorded into a log file for later reference. So again, the STS-ADM-O export command does give you a lot more information than the straight backup. So then, as you can see, it generates a log for us that we can view at any time. So if we now do a directory listing of our data files, you'll see that our backup one here is, again, significantly larger than our export. But both of these options allow us to create a backup that we can now take to another machine and then obviously import and merge our data if required. So what we can do now is that now that we've got our backup file, we can now look at creating a schedule for which this will run. So in Windows Server 2008, if we go into the Server Manager and we have a look at, let's close this, we go down to Configuration, we go into the Task Scheduler, and what we can do here is obviously we can now create a very basic task schedule. So again, I can create a basic task up here, and all I need to do basically is nominate a time at which this task will run. So I will call this SharePoint Backup. And it's timed out just when I didn't want it to. So what I want to do is I want to run this backup daily. I want to run it at whatever time, and the action is to start a program. So now all I need to do is browse to the location of my script, and again that will be in Program Files, Common Files, but again you put this batch file anywhere, Microsoft Shared, Web Server Extensions 12. Okay, so what I'm looking for is in bin, and down here I should find a file called SP Backup, which I can open. Okay, and I can add arguments, go next. Okay, I can specify further properties if I want, but basically I'll finish the option there. So this means that at that certain time of the day, that task is now scheduled to run that batch file which will back up the SharePoint data. And again, what it's doing is that I would recommend generally that you back up the SharePoint data via two different methods. Firstly, run a full backup, the -O backup option, but also run the -O export, because the -O export gives you the advantage that you can take the information and you can merge it into another site, gives you more flexibility, and also gives you more information about the correct running of that backup. So again, if you have the facility, aside from doing any SQL backups or disk images, it's always recommended to do a specific SharePoint backup, because typically if a SharePoint site fails, normally and it's a critical site, a good recommendation is to always have a blank generic site, maybe sitting in a virtual machine on another server, and then what you can do is you can simply then restore your backup to that machine and get your users up and running very quickly, rather than having to rebuild the server, restore SQL, connect the databases. So again, there is a lot of advantage in disaster recovery option for using just a very simple SharePoint command line backup like we've got here. So what I'll do now is just switch back to the slides. Okay, so we should have the slides back on deck there. Okay, so let's now turn our attention to our document library best practices. Okay, the advantage of a document library in SharePoint is probably that you can sort the data much quicker. So again, you can look at the data and you can sort it by not only file name, by size, but also by some additional fields that you can add. So again, the sorting abilities within SharePoint for documents are far superior, I believe, to those found in the normal file manager. You can also filter your information. So typically what people do is they create in their file system a folder and then a subfolder and subfolders beyond that as a way of organizing their data. A better way perhaps to consider it with SharePoint is you can throw all your files, no matter what they are, where they refer to, into a single document library, and then you can use the filtering technology to be able to show different views of the information you want. So what you can do is you can simply display, say, your Excel files, or simply display files that you've tagged as business files. So again, rather than having lots and lots of subfolders, it may be a better way just to throw everything into one directory so you know where it is, it's easier to work with that way, and use the filtering technology that's built into SharePoint. Again, that's a feature that's not available in the normal file system. You can also look and present the data in document libraries via different ways. So, for example, you may wish to display the data by file name, date, and who's changed the file. But you may want another summary that shows just the file name and the file size. Using the different views that are available in SharePoint, you can basically show this data any way you want. So another way is that you can create a view for certain users. So if you have very rudimentary users, you can give them a view which is far simpler than what they may see in the file system. If they generally go into Windows Explorer within a file system, they're presented with a whole range of information that may not be relevant and may end up confusing them. But with SharePoint, what you can do is you can apply a view which will limit the amount of information that they see, making it easier and less intimidating for them to work with. Another big feature of SharePoint is the ability to add metadata. By metadata, I mean it's additional information that is stored within the SharePoint document library that helps you tag your files. So for example, what you could do is you could have a single directory and you could have files in there that refer to a budget, but maybe also refer to a forecast. You could set up an additional field which you could use as a tagging field and tag each file as required. Therefore, you could then use that field to not only sort your data, but also to display different views. SharePoint also allows the ability to version files. So this means that every time that a file is stored in your SharePoint document library, it is given an independent version number. This is effectively a backup. So this means that you can always roll back to a previous version, provided the versioning settings turned on, obviously. But this allows you, if you're working on a proposal or some sort of document that's important, that you can choose to create different versions that you can then roll back to if required. Finally, SharePoint allows you the ability to cover check-in and check-out. So this means that you can force users who want to work on a file to check it out so they can work on it to ensure that nobody else is working on the file at the same time. This means that only one person is able to make changes. This prevents multiple edits and unexpected overwrites of a document. It also provides you a good auditing abilities, because every time someone checks a file out, they need to provide documentation or a reason when they're checking it back in. So it can provide you a good audit option there. So what we'll do is we'll just swap back to our desktop. Okay, so let me just enable the desktop again. So what I'll do from here is, rather than show you a Virgin site, I'll go to the site that I maintain here on the internet. So this is my support web website. You can view this on the internet by going to supportweb.ciaops.net.au. Over here you'll notice that I maintain a document library. Inside this document library is basically full of how to do documents that I've created and uploaded. And as you can see, there's quite a number of these documents, but they're all basically in a single location. Now you'll notice that besides the standard name, title and file size, I have an additional field here called technology. This technology field is basically an additional metadata file that I've created to allow me to sort my documents much quicker and faster. So if I click on the document on the field heading here, I will be presented with a field here that will allow me to sort my technology, my documents in this library via what appears in the technology field. Okay, so back to where we were. Apologies for that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go back into my document library. Hopefully it'll be a bit quicker. I can select the technology field. And as you can see, by just clicking on the field, I've now sorted it from A through Z. Now what I can do is, if I go to the right of the field, you'll see that I've got the option to sort it by ascending or descending, but also to sort it by the tags that I've put in this field. So again, I can select the SharePoint field, and what I'm now viewing is a filter, which you'll notice the little filter icon just up here, that shows me that the view that I'm looking at is currently filtered, so it's only showing things that respond to the filter that I've selected. In this case, the word SharePoint. So again, if I change the filtering to Windows, all I will see the documents that have that meta tag Windows. So again, this is a more powerful way to sort your information, or to view your information, or to locate your information, rather than having to put it in folders and subfolders. Now what I can also do is, let me just turn off that clear the filter, and again it's a dynamic filter. Now what you'll notice just above the fields here is what's known as the view. If I pull this down, at the moment I've got a number of different views that I can view my data. Now if I select the All Documents view, what you'll notice is not only now have I got documents in here, but you'll see that I've also got a folder. So again, SharePoint document libraries support the ability to have standard files and folders. So again, if I go into my SBS 2003 folder, you'll notice that I have a number of documents. Okay. Now, again, if I now change this view back to complete and go back to the top, you'll notice that the folder doesn't appear. So using SharePoint, what I've been able to do with this view complete, which I'll show you shortly, is I've been able to basically display all the files that appear within all the subfolders in one location. So again, this All Documents is the way the document library actually appears. So it's a number of folders and subfolders, just like a normal file system. But using the view called complete, I can basically aggregate all those files into one view at the top of my tree to make it easy to locate the information that I'm after. Now the other thing you'll notice here is that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different documents. In the top right, I'm not currently signed in, so I'm currently an anonymous user. If I choose to sign in, which I'll do, you'll see that I'm now KB user, but you'll see automatically the minute that I log in, I'm in the same directory, but now I have a whole swag more of additional files that I have access to. So again, what can be viewed within this folder can be controlled by the securities of that user. So you can put individual securities on files within folders so that only certain users can view them. And the great thing about SharePoint is it's dynamic and involves something called security trimming. This basically means that if the user doesn't have access to the information, then they can't see it. So if we now turn our attention, let's go back to the top of our tree. Okay, what I'll do here is, let me go back to complete. Now what I'll do here is, now that I'm logged in as an administrator, I can actually modify this view. So I can modify how this view displays my data. So again, I can give it a name. I can choose which columns I wish to display in my data. So in this case, I've only got a short number of fields, but I can select to show any additional ones that I want. I can choose to sort my information. So in this case, my view is sorting by name. I can then choose to filter my information. This is what I was talking about. If you want to create a view in which users are only able to see a limited amount of information, then what you can do is you can establish a filter, and you can say, if the technology is equal to SharePoint, then this is what will be displayed in the view. So again, not something you can normally achieve with a file system. I can also choose to group my files. Again, so what I can group them by is I could group them by their file size, or I could group them by their technology. So what I could do is I could display them in their technology groups if I so decided. Again, not something easily done with a file system. I can also choose if the columns have numbers. I can also choose to automatically total up these columns, and I can also do things like I can count how many items there are, and if there are numbers involved in them, in this case file size, as you can see, I can not only do that, I can do a count, an average, a maximum, a minimum, a sum, a standard deviation. So an example may be is perhaps you have a number of outstanding invoices. You could add a metadata field, an additional field which puts in the outstanding balance, and then when you create a view, you could do so that would show you maybe the maximum, but maybe the sum, the total of the outstanding invoices. The other thing that you'll notice here, and as you can see, this is the one that allows me to show all my files and folders that normally appear in subdirectories. Right, so again, I'm choosing to show all items without folders. So again, this may be handy in the fact that maybe you've got already got a defined file and folder structure that you're using. You could import that or copy that information as is straight into SharePoint so it appears exactly the same for the people to work with. However, by creating a view and not changing your data, you're able to bring all those files to the top level, then add metadata, which may make it much easier in the long run for your users to identify. So again, the SharePoint document library gives you a much more flexibility in how you display your files and what information is displayed to them. Now, how did I add this additional field here? Again, if you're logged in as an administrator, I just need to go to the settings and I can choose to create a column. Now, when I create a column, I can choose from a number of different options. Again, so I can create a column, I just need to give it a name. I can make the column text, multiple text, numbers, currency, time and dates, all sorts of things. Okay, so again, it's important to consider with SharePoint to get the most out of a document library that a lot of the advantages or a lot of the improvements lie in your ability to create additional metadata fields. So the other thing that we can look at within settings is our document library settings. So again, as an administrator, we have access to the customization of this document library. And we can set the name, the description, we can delete the document library, we can do all sorts of things. But if I have a look at the versioning settings over here, at the moment I have it turned off. So again, it's requiring content approval for submitted items, and the moment it's set to no. But I can turn that on. So that means that if anybody submits something to this document library, it requires that it be approved by a person with a high level of security. And when they create a version, you can see you can choose to create major versions or minor versions. So again, that allows you to track updates and changes and actually roll back if required. So what we might do is give you a quick idea of that. Let me just switch back to the other desktop, if I can. Let's see where that's up to. Okay, so what I can do here is, let's forget that since that's taking too long. Let me just go back to my company website here. I'll go back to my shared documents. And again, what I can do here is, as you can see, I've uploaded a file, but the approval status at the moment is set to draft. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to go in here and I need to publish that file as a major version. So again, this file is now ready to go. And again, you'll see that it moves from draft to pending. So again, I can then, once it's now pending, I can then go in to approve or reject the file. And again, as a manager, I can approve this is good for production and go OK. Alright, so again, it is now set to the status approval. Now, if I go and have a look here at the version history, you should see that, just like that. Oh, there we go. So at the moment there's only one version, but every time a new version is created, you'll see a new entry here. So again, once I've created these versions and I have multiple versions, I can actually roll back to any version that I want. Now it's important to remember, obviously, if you're creating large documents, that any time you create a version, it is actually taking up space. So again, if you have a large file, you're creating lots of versions, doing a lot of check-in and check-outs, well then it's going to chew up a lot of disk space. So again, you need to be aware of that. So again, you can see here that we can cover things like, if we want to work on this file, we can now check it out. So immediately that we check it out, we get a little green icon indicating that it's checked out. That means that it's read-only for every other user except the person that checked it out. And you'll notice that the approval status goes straight back to draft. Now once I finish with the file and I check it in, you'll see that I'm now checking in maybe a major version. I changed the headings. So it's now gone back to pending. I now have to approve it. So I'll approve it again. I don't have to make comments. And again, we should now see, if we go into our version history, we've now got two versions. Okay, so we've got a backup of each, and we can obviously roll back to either. So again, this gives you the basic setup for a document management system. By no means is it a high-end document management system. However, for most companies, it's more than adequate. And again, as an administrator, if you need to, say the file's checked out by one of your users, you can go in as an administrator and you can choose to discard the checkout. So again, you're not locking yourself in. It is able to be overwritten as required. So a couple of recommendations for document libraries. It's not a good idea to store large transactional databases in document libraries, things that are constantly being accessed by users and doing small updates. So again, SharePoint is designed for documents rather than databases. Obviously, the larger that a file is in this library, it will require a longer time to load and download and do those sort of things. So again, because it's working through a web browser, you may experience timeouts with especially large files. However, it is possible to link to a SharePoint document library like a normal file system. So again, you can use your direct mappings, your UNC path, to map to it like a normal file in Windows Explorer, which makes it far easier for users who are used to the old way of doing things. So again, it's not something that is completely different, it's just an addition, an improvement on what's already there. The other thing to consider also is that down here that you've got a recycle bin. So let's say that I go in here and I delete this file as a user. Okay, so the first thing that it does is when it deletes it, it moves it to the recycle bin. And I can, if I want, simply select it and restore that option. Now obviously things don't stay in the recycle bin forever because obviously take up a lot of space. So again, you can control how long it stays in the user recycle bin, and then beyond that, once it deletes it, once it's removed from the user recycle bin, it's then moved into an administrator recycle bin, which you can, as an administrator, recover the information that has been deleted. So again, there's two stages at which your users, if they do make an issue or make a mistake, can have the files recovered. Now, if the file or the information is not able to be recovered, again, that's where something like your command line backups come in, because you can then maybe import one of your command line backups into a subsite and recover the individual item. So again, there's a lot of advantages in using a document library as opposed to just a straight file system. Probably one of the biggest pluses I can see is that a lot of users have issues when they drag and drop files using the Windows File Manager. So, but they may by accident drag and drop a whole file system or the wrong file into the wrong location, or accidentally delete something by leaning on the wrong key. That's far more difficult to do in an interface like SharePoint because it's all web-based. So again, another big advantage in that respect. Okay, so let's just swap back to our slides and continue on. And we covered a bit of the securities. So some of the downsides of SharePoint. What you need to consider is the fact that SharePoint has a single point of failure. If SharePoint's not up, then none of your data is available. None of your files will be enabled. None of your files will be accessible. None of your lists. None of your documentation. Okay, so in a file system, typically you've got to lose the whole file server before the system becomes unavailable and people can copy files backwards and forwards. If the SharePoint site goes down, well, you potentially have a lot of information that's unavailable to a lot of users. SharePoint has a number of dependencies. It depends on technologies like Internet Information Server, the basic web server on Windows. It has a dependency on the Windows file system and on the database server being SQL. So I have seen instances where patches and updates to things like Windows and SQL have caused problems for SharePoint. So again, you need to be aware of the fact that if you are putting updates or working with IIS or maybe upgrading SQL, that it may have ramifications for SharePoint. So again, SharePoint is not a standalone technology. It requires a number of Microsoft dependencies, which should be, again, well maintained and aware of any downsides. I think that there's also generally a difficulty in backing up and restoring. Typically, if you want to restore a single file to a SharePoint site that's not in the recycle bin, it can be a bit difficult because, again, how do you get that file? You can't just restore the whole thing. You can't just go in and do an item level restore. It can be quite involved. And again, if the whole SharePoint site becomes unavailable, then again you face the issue that potentially how do I get the SharePoint site up quickly? One of my experiences has taught me that I generally would maintain a virtual machine image of a clean SharePoint site so that in the unexpected event that the SharePoint site did fail, I could quickly restore my data from the last backup into that virtual image and have my users up and running while I could work on the issues with the original server. So again, utilizing something like virtual technology and having a full standby server is definitely an option worth considering. And another advantage obviously is that the SharePoint product itself is free, so and the virtual PC, for example, from Microsoft is also free. So there are a lot of ways to mitigate the downsides if you do have problems. Now there are issues with other browsers. All the other browsers work and have the ability to view SharePoint sites without issue. So it will work with Firefox, it will work with Safari, it will work with Chrome. The major issues I've seen with browsers is if you, as an administrator, try and log into the site, then sometimes things like Firefox and Safari won't support that login process because it's very much a Microsoft technology and requires Internet Explorer. So again, SharePoint can be used to view and generally work with data without issue in other browsers. However, at an administration level, I would suggest that it's always handy to have access to Internet Explorer to be able to achieve those functions as well. The other issue that seems to crop a lot of people is the fact that we can't put securities on our individual columns. This means that we can obviously put securities on individual items within our site, but we can't specify that people are only able to see a certain number of columns. So I understand the issue there, and I think that perhaps is a level above what you need to, what can be achieved with SharePoint. But it's important to remember that I can, at the lowest level, I can restrict individual items in a list, but I can't restrict users from viewing individual columns within an item. So, what are some alternatives to SharePoint? Okay, so probably the most common one I've seen is the generic websites using a content management system. So these proprietary level platforms that have a back end that you log into a web browser and you set up your securities, you set up your document libraries, users can then interact with them. So again, there are plenty of these around. They're all very different. They have their advantages, but they are usually significantly expensive, and on the other side they do tend to lock you into their technology, which is obviously much less widespread than the standard Microsoft technology. Now another interesting one is Google Sites. Now Google Sites is obviously Google's attempt to replicate the success that Microsoft's having with SharePoint. So what I'll do is, let me just swap out back to my browser, and let's just have a quick look at a quick demo I racked up in Google Sites to give you just an idea. So again, Google Sites is a free tool. Again, it looks very much, obviously aiming to be like SharePoint. This is a project team wiki. Again, you've got the ability and the quick start menu down the left. You can put in pictures, you've got to-do items. Okay, you've got files that you can upload. So again, looks very similar. Again, you can upload them, you can view them, you can download them. So again, very similar to the way that and you can embed things like, again, of course, Google's technology. You can embed, Google spreadsheets, and you can obviously add your own graphics as desired. So again, my comment would be is that I would see that the Google offering has definitely improved and is improving all the time. However, it's probably not nearly as mature as the SharePoint technology. One of the big advantages, I suppose, in this case is that the sites.google.com is totally hosted on the web. So again, there's no need for you to install or run up any infrastructure. You can get up and running very quickly at no cost using the Google alternative. So the other thing that we'll hopefully have a look at is something that's probably still in beta, but if I can bring it up, it's worthwhile having a look. Google Wave is Google's attempt to overcome some of the downsides of email technology. Okay, so it doesn't want to use that. So let me just fire up Firefox. So while we're waiting, just let me file back to my PowerPoint slides and finish off with. Okay, so again, Google Wave is potentially an option. It's not really a replacement for emails as such. Google are pitching it as a collaboration tool. So again, in some ways, it's a way for teams to collaborate around a document, which is probably the most common thing that people need to collaborate on. So let me see if I can bring up Firefox now. Okay. Okay, so again, you can see here's my site here. Okay, so this is in Google. As you can see, I can edit a page. I get much more functionality using Firefox. But if I go to Google Wave, hopefully I'll be able to give you an idea of what. Again, Google Wave, very early days, still very much in beta test, but it could be an alternative down the track depending on how it improves. So again, each message, I suppose traditional email is what Google like to recall as a wave. And as you can see, we can have lots of conversations here. We can, example, share a file. We can collaborate on that file. We can have multiple people working in this file. So again, if I want to add a person, I simply click add, and that person then gets access to all the information in this wave, the text, the documents, and everything. So again, probably a bit early days, but it's probably something worth considering that may mature into a technology that may threaten SharePoint or may be a competitor to SharePoint in the future. Not 100% sure as yet, but it's something to obviously. Okay, so let's talk about quickly talk about SharePoint 2010. We're running out of time here, unfortunately. The important thing to remember is that it is still in beta. It has a new look and feel, basically has a ribbon interface, very much like Office 2010, Office 2007 and Office 2010 will become. And it has a very similar architecture underneath to, let me just keep moving along while I get that working. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to cover in depth the embedding of the video. So what I'll do is I'll just step you through the process. Basically what you'll find is if you go to YouTube, so again if I bring up YouTube for you here, swap back to Firefox. So if we again go to YouTube, what you'll find is when we select a video, so if I bring up a video in YouTube, what we hopefully will find is an embed code. So again, see down here you've got this embed code. What you need to do basically is to copy that embed code and then use that to import into SharePoint. So let me just go back. So you copy the embed code from YouTube, you insert a content web part into a web part page on SharePoint, and basically then you copy and paste the embedded code that you've taken from here into that web part page and into that content web part, and then you can view the video. So let me just, again, here's a Firefox asking for authentication, and as you can see, if I try and log into it using Firefox authentication, it can be a bit kludgy at times. So if I now go to the demo site, okay, so what we've got over here is I have embedded Google Maps. I can do the same thing. But down here you'll see I would have a YouTube video. So again, if I choose to modify content here, okay, so again I can modify the shared web part, and it's probably better if I do this in IE. So let me just share that. You just go back to logging in again. Again, this is part of the issue with the browsers. As you can see, once you log in as administrator in Firefox, it's not nearly as functional as what it is in IE. Okay, so here's my YouTube embedded into my web part. If I pull this down and go to modify shared web part, you'll see that it is a content editor web part. I would edit the source editor, so this allows me to input raw HTML, and I just need to share that window so you can see what's going on. Can't seem to share that window. Text entry. So let me just share the whole desktop for a sec. Okay, so now, hopefully, okay, now you can see that once I've selected source editor, I basically copy in the information that I took from my YouTube, and it will now display on the page automatically for me. So again, what I can do is I can ensure that my SharePoint site can not only include standard SharePoint content, but can now also start including content from internet applications like Google Maps and something like YouTube. So the conclusions are that it's always worthwhile to do a scheduled command line backup, and especially the -O export option, very much recommended. The document libraries, as we've seen, have advantages over using normal files and folders. They allow you to do filtering, sorting, and to add things like metadata to make it easier for users to work with. SharePoint has a number of dependencies, including IIS, Windows, and SQL. So again, if you're putting on updates, Windows patches, be aware that that may affect those dependencies and in turn affect SharePoint. And there are plenty of alternatives to SharePoint, but my general feeling is that they're far less mature than what SharePoint currently provides. So again, as a free product that can be downloaded and installed onto any Windows Server technology, there are a lot of options there. The biggest advantage probably with SharePoint over any other alternative is its integration, its close integration with Microsoft Office products. So what will happen is you'll shortly be sent a follow-up survey via email. If you complete that survey and enter your email address, I'll send you a resources guide based on today's session. Because you've also attended the session that will be available for download, I'll make the full version available for you to download and view. So if you missed anything or you want to review it, you can have that file for your reference. Please don't forget that I'll be running future presentations, normally every second Thursday morning at 10 AM Sydney time. And again, the best place to find out when those blogs are happening, when those webinars are happening, via my blog. So I would like to close by saying that I would ask you to consider the Windows SharePoint Operations Guide that I have created. You'll find more information about that at www.wssops.com. And finally, there is my email address and my blog address, so please feel free to contact me at any point and give me feedback or let me know what you'd like to see. So let me just quickly switch back, and this is still not ready, so I apologise for that. I'll go back to my slides. Unfortunately, I think that we covered most of the information. I do apologise for the number of small technical hitches we've had. I hope that you've enjoyed the webinar, and like I said, you'll receive an email with information about how to get access to that download. Thank you very much for your time. Wish you all the best for the rest of the day. What I'll do is try and get the 2010 operating in the background, but by all means, I thank you for the time. I don't want to keep you longer than you've committed to. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.